if someone is listening and they are on the front lines, they are an educator and they have been impacted, triggered, and feeling burnt out, suffering from compassion fatigue. They are a nurse that just is regretting going in for the next emergency. And they're listening right now and they want to give up. What do you say to them?
That there's hope. That, for myself, there had to be a moment of pause. For me, that moment of pause started to come when I didn't love arriving to doing the thing that I used to love arriving to do. And I think that's where it begins for most of us, is that usually, like you're saying, by the time we realize there's a problem, we're like thigh deep in the quicksand of compassion fatigue, right? And we didn't know we needed a crisis plan, and we didn't know we needed a safety plan. The kindest thing that I can say is remember why you did this, right? And for me, I had become so impaired and so sick under the sickness of the vicarious trauma, the anger, the resentment, the disenfranchisement, the betrayal of the system, that it clouded my judgment so deeply that it was just anger all the time, right? And while I wasn't taking it out on my clients, I was sure snapping at my administrators, and it was reflecting in ways that didn't make me proud. Remember why you came here. Remember that you stood and you took an oath that said you'd do no harm, and you raised your hand to say that you would serve and protect and treat and heal and nourish and nurture. And it begins here, vitally. It begins here. Remember why you came here. Remember why you did this, and take a look at counselor know thyself, physician heal thyself. Like, when did you stop doing that, right? And if they're not doing it for you and you're not holding them to task to support you, we still took the oath that we need to do it for ourselves, right? And so there's no, as burdening as it feels and as shameful as it feels, remember why. Remember your why and apply that to yourself. Or remember your person who inspired you, to become who or what you are today, and honor yourself in the way that person would until you can for yourself. And those are things I had to progress through until I was ready to say, I'm an awarded clinician who's an alcoholic who completely railroaded my life because I didn't take care of myself and the resources weren't there for me to do it.
Yes.
And it's not so hard to say now. It's not so hard to say
now. You're on the
flip
side.
I'm on the flip side.
You're on the
right?
flip
And there's
side.
hope. There's hope, right?
Yes.
There's hope.
And you're holding space for those others who you're saying, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to come on over here.
I need you.
Yeah.
People like me need people to say, I'm a nurse and I got a DUI yesterday.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I need to know, just like we've talked in cultural competencies, I need to know that there are people of color advancing my field. I need to know that there are safe spaces that I can go to. In the same way, I need to know that my brothers and sisters standing in the ER with me struggle just like humans when the cape is off, right?
Yes.
There is a flip side, and our free agency of helpers, we deserve to have that community and space because we're going to schools and hospitals and clinics every day, building that for society. And where do we go for each other?
You said something in the statement that you just shared moments ago, and the word shame just leapt up and out of your conversation for me. It really just, because when we really think about and understand compassion fatigue, when I work with teams and we look at some of Dr. Charles Figley's work around compassion fatigue, it actually is predictable. It is preventable. It's treatable. It's actually a natural part of being in the field.
Yes.
So there shouldn't be shame.
Right.
Because it should be expected.
Right.
And so if we know that this is going to be a part of what's going to happen when people are constantly giving, then what are some things that administrative teams should be considering and preparing within their process, their routines
Yeah.
to support something that they know is going to show up?
I think that answer for me is probably, I have to disclaim, at this time in our world, very idealistic. But in the hopes of hope, right? I think it begins again with a concentrated, intentional, very intentional, deliberate act in leadership that is saying and evidencing and demonstrating we have to listen now, right? And then taking that information and restructuring the way that decisions are made within an organization and identifying the decisions that should include true stakeholders, the deliverers of the service, right? And there needs to be, why there isn't, I still don't really understand, for educators, first responders, docs, nurses, all of us. I don't know why there's not, for a bunch of people who are trained in conflict and crisis intervention, I don't understand why there are not embedded natural assessments and resources in HR departments that identify when and where, right? Like, what is a matrix of impairment?
Yes.
And how do we start preventing? You said prevention. How do we do impairment prevention for our staff on the front end as like part of the benefits package?
Right.
Right? Not a pizza party and not a webinar and not a reactive, not responsive, a reactive approach to this person's a mess now and our census is going to go down and like, how are we going to bill? No, like we should be a little more considered and informed and prepared for than that. So I think it begins with administration and leadership and funding sources.
Well, I was waiting for that. I'm like, intentional money put
funding
aside.
sources,
Yes.
Right? So like, why doesn't SAM? I've been and I'm going to say it, as a therapist for 17 years, I've been schlepping trauma-informed care because it's been required in treatment plans. And we know this, right? For billing and UR. Okay, then like SAMHSA, why don't you come down here, right? And take a look at the people who are delivering these services, or Board of Education, or whomever, when we're talking about governing bodies. And why aren't those major funding sources looking at the quality of health and wellness for the provider, for the educator, for the clinician? They're looking at the bottom line and they're looking at the outcome of pretty shoddy recipient feedback forms, right? That tell nothing about the identity or the experience of being an employee for the organization, or tell nothing about the vicarious load and the nature of the role that the person's working in. So I think that there's a couple systems that need to be held accountable and have to be willing, again, to listen to this conversation and allow the people who aren't benefiting from the organization and are burning out to weigh in on, this is what we need you to hear and understand about our experience.